Sometimes the worst day of your life becomes the first day of something you never saw coming. For Naomi Carter, that day arrived on a cold November evening in Little Italy when her landlord showed up at her door with an eviction notice and a threat. She had been living paycheck to paycheck, raising her 5-year-old daughter alone, trying to make her art pay the bills while working double shifts at a coffee shop downtown. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and at the absolute end of her rope. And then Victor Marino, her greasy landlord with wandering hands and a cruel smile, cornered her in the hallway outside her apartment and put his hands on her in a way that made her blood run cold. What Victor didn't know was that the building had been quietly purchased 3 weeks earlier, and the new owner, Dante Romano, happened to be walking up those stairs at exactly the wrong moment. Or maybe it was exactly the right moment. Because Dante Romano, a 40-year-old man with ice in his veins and blood on his hands, had exactly zero tolerance for men who hurt women. One look at Naomi's terrified face, one glimpse of Victor's hand wrapped around her throat, and Dante made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The words he snarled were simple, deadly, and absolute. You touched the wrong woman. What happened next involved dangerous protection, a world of violence Naomi never wanted to understand, and a love that grew in the darkness between them, fierce and consuming and utterly unstoppable. Naomi Carter had been late with rent exactly twice in the 3 years she'd lived in the cramped 2-bedroom apartment on Mulberry Street. Both times she'd caught up within a week, both times she'd apologized profusely, and both times she'd promised it wouldn't happen again. But life as a single mother was unpredictable. Her daughter Maya's asthma medication wasn't cheap. Childcare cost more than she'd ever imagined. And her art, the paintings she created late at night, after Maya was asleep, hadn't sold in months despite her best efforts. The coffee shop where she worked had cut her hours because business was slow, and her other job cleaning offices paid minimum wage. She was drowning, had been drowning for months, but she kept swimming anyway because that's what mothers did. They survived. This month, rent was 10 days late. Naomi had $300 saved up, but she needed $550, and payday wasn't until Friday. Still 4 days away. She'd called the landlord's office that morning, left a message explaining the situation, promising to pay by the weekend. She hadn't expected Victor Marino to show up at her door at 7 o'clock at night while she was trying to get Maya to eat dinner. The knock had been aggressive, 3 hard bangs that rattled the thin door and made Maya jump in her seat, her brown eyes going wide with fear. "It's okay, baby," Naomi had said, keeping her voice calm even as anxiety spiked through her chest. "Just someone at the door. Keep eating your chicken nuggets." She'd opened the door to find Victor leaning against the frame, his bulk filling the doorway, his breath already smelling like the cheap whiskey he started drinking around noon every day. Victor was in his 50s, overweight, with thinning gray hair and small, mean eyes that always made Naomi's skin crawl. He'd been managing the building for the previous owner for years, and he treated the tenants like garbage, especially the women, especially the ones who couldn't afford lawyers. "Mr. Marino," Naomi had started, keeping the door mostly closed, her body blocking his view into the apartment. "I called this morning. I'll have the rent by Friday, I promise." "Friday's too late," Victor had said, his words slightly slurred. "You're already late. Building's under new ownership now, and the new owner doesn't accept excuses." Naomi's stomach had dropped. "New owner? Since when?" "Since 3 weeks ago. And he wants all tenants current on rent or out. So you got 2 choices, sweetheart." He'd smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made Naomi want to slam the door in his face. "Pay me tonight. All of it. Or start packing." "I don't have it tonight," Naomi had said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "But I will on Friday. I've never missed rent before. This is only the 3rd time I've been late, and I always catch up." "Not good enough." Victor had pushed against the door slightly, forcing Naomi to either let him in or make a scene. "You know, there might be another way we could work this out. You're a pretty girl, Naomi. I'm sure we could come to some kind of arrangement." The suggestion had been clear, disgusting, and not even remotely the first time Victor had hinted at it. Naomi had felt rage and fear warring in her chest. "That's not happening. Ever. I'll have your money Friday." She'd tried to close the door, but Victor had wedged his foot in, his expression darkening. "I don't think you understand the situation you're in. You got a kid in there. Where are you going to go if I evict you? Shelters don't take women with kids in this neighborhood. Maybe you should be nicer to me." "Please leave," Naomi had said, her voice shaking now despite her best effort to sound firm. "I'll have the rent Friday. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." Victor had laughed. Actually laughed. "Call them." "Tell them what?" That you can't pay your rent and you're mad about it? They'll just tell you it's a civil matter, sweetheart. You got no power here. He'd reached past the door, his hand grabbing Naomi's wrist before she could pull back, his fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. Why don't we go inside and talk about this like adults? Maybe after we work something out, I'll forget about this month's rent entirely. Naomi had yanked her arm back, stumbling slightly, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. Get out. Get away from me. But Victor had stepped forward, actually stepping into her apartment now, pushing the door wider. Don't be stupid. You need this place. Your kid needs this place. All you gotta do is be nice to me. That's all. Just be nice. And that's when Naomi had made the split-second decision to run. She'd grabbed her phone from her back pocket, had turned toward the kitchen where Maya was still sitting at the table, thank God oblivious with her headphones on watching something on a tablet, and Naomi had bolted for the fire escape at the end of the hallway, desperate to get to where other tenants might hear her if she screamed. Victor had lunged after her faster than she expected for a man his size, his hand catching the back of her shirt. Naomi had twisted away, the fabric tearing slightly, and she'd made it out into the hallway, heading for the stairs. But Victor had caught her halfway down, his hand closing around her throat from behind, slamming her against the peeling wallpaper hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. You think you can run from me? Victor had snarled in her ear, his breath hot and disgusting against her skin. You think you got options? I own you, sweetheart. Until you pay that rent, you do what I say. Naomi had clawed at his hand, trying to breathe, trying to scream, but his grip was too tight, and black spots were starting to dance at the edges of her vision. She'd thought, absurdly, about Maya, about who would take care of her daughter if something happened, about how she'd fought so hard to build a life for them and it was ending here, in this filthy hallway, at the hands of a man who thought he could take whatever he wanted. And then suddenly Victor's hand was gone, his weight was gone, and Naomi was gasping for air, collapsing against the wall, her hands flying to her throat. She'd looked up through tears to see Victor on the floor, someone's hand wrapped around his throat exactly the way his had been around hers, and a man she'd never seen before was crouched, over him with murder in his eyes. You touched the wrong woman, the stranger had said, his voice low and deadly calm, each word enunciated with terrifying precision. This is my building. She is my tenant, and you just put your hands on something that belongs to me. The man had lifted Victor slightly by the throat, then slammed him back down against the floor hard enough that Naomi heard Victor's head crack against the wood. You're fired, the stranger had continued. You're going to leave this building, leave this neighborhood, and if I ever hear that you've come within 10 blocks of Naomi Carter or her daughter, I will remove parts of your body that you're quite attached to. Do you understand me? Victor had made a choking sound that might have been agreement, his face turning purple, his hands scrabbling uselessly at the stranger's arm. The man had looked up then, his eyes meeting Naomi's, and she'd seen something shift in his expression, the cold fury giving way to something, like concern. Are you hurt? He'd asked her, his voice gentler now but still carrying that undercurrent of controlled violence. Did he hurt you? Naomi had opened her mouth but no sound came out. She'd just shaken her head, her hand still pressed to her throat, trying to process what had just happened. The stranger had looked back down at Victor, his expression hardening again. If you're not out of this building in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to make you regret every decision that led you to this moment. Go. He'd released Victor, who had scrambled to his feet, wheezing and coughing, terror written across his face. Victor had shot one last look at Naomi, something vicious and resentful in his eyes, before he'd practically run down the stairs, his heavy footsteps echoing in the stairwell. The stranger had stood slowly, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive-looking black shirt, and turned his full attention to Naomi. He was tall, maybe 6'2", with dark hair graying at maybe the temples, sharp cheekbones, and eyes so dark they were almost black. He looked like money and danger in equal measure, like someone who belonged in boardrooms and dark alleys with equal ease. And when he'd moved toward her, Naomi had flinched instinctively, pressing herself back against the wall. He'd stopped immediately, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. I'm not going to hurt you, he'd said quietly. My name is Dante Romano. I bought this building 3 weeks ago. I was coming to inspect the upper floors when I saw what was happening. Are you okay? Naomi had nodded again, not trusting her voice yet, her mind racing. Dante Romano. The name sounded familiar, though she couldn't place it. My daughter, she'd managed to rasp. I need to check on my daughter. Of course. Dante had stepped back, giving her space. Lead the way. I'll make sure that piece of garbage doesn't come back." Naomi had hurried back to her apartment, her legs shaky, her heart still hammering. Maya was still at the table, still oblivious, still watching her show. Relief had flooded through Naomi so intensely she'd almost collapsed. "Hey, baby," she'd said, keeping her voice light. "How's your dinner?" "Good, Mommy." Maya had looked up with a smile, her 2 front teeth missing, her hair in the braids Naomi had done that morning. "Can I have more juice?" "Sure, sweetie." Naomi had poured more juice with trembling hands, aware of Dante Romano standing in her doorway watching. She'd turned to face him, stepping between him and Maya instinctively. "Thank you for your help. I'm fine now. You can go." Dante's eyes had moved from Naomi to Maya and back again, something thoughtful in his expression. "We need to talk about what just happened. And about your rent situation. But not in front of your daughter." He'd pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "This is my personal number. Call me tomorrow, and we'll sort this out properly. In the meantime, you don't owe rent this month. Consider it handled." Naomi had stared at the card, not taking it. "I don't need charity. I can pay my rent." "It's not charity. It's compensation for having to deal with a property manager who should have been fired years ago. Take the card, Naomi." His voice had been firm but not unkind. "I don't make offers like this twice." She'd taken the card finally, her fingers brushing his briefly, and had felt an unexpected jolt of awareness, like touching a live wire. Dante had seemed to feel it too, because his eyes had darkened slightly, his gaze sharpening. "Lock your door," he'd said. "I'll have new locks installed tomorrow, and a new property manager will be in touch by the end of the week. You and your daughter are safe here. You have my word on that." And then he'd left, his footsteps quiet on the stairs, leaving Naomi standing in her doorway with his business card in her hand and 1,000 questions racing through her mind. She'd looked down at the card. Plain, white, expensive paper. Just his name and a phone number. No company, no title, nothing to indicate what he did for a living or why a man like him had bought a rundown building in Little Italy. Naomi had closed and locked the door, had checked on Maya one more time, and then had gone to the bathroom to look at her throat in the mirror. Bruises were already forming where Victor's fingers had dug in, dark purple marks that would take days to fade. She'd pulled her shirt collar up to hide them and had gone back to the kitchen to finish dinner with her daughter, trying to pretend everything was normal. But everything had changed in that hallway. She'd been saved by a stranger, by a man whose eyes held shadows and whose voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. A man who had handled Victor like he weighed nothing, who had threatened him with such casual certainty that Naomi had no doubt he meant every word. That night, after Maya was asleep, Naomi had sat at her tiny kitchen table and had done what any sensible person would do in the age of information. She'd Googled Dante Romano, and what she'd found had made her blood run cold. Dante Romano was not just a wealthy businessman. He was the head of the Romano crime family, one of the oldest and most powerful mafia organizations in New York. The articles were careful, always using words like alleged and rumored, but the pattern was clear. Dante Romano was a mafia boss, a man who controlled everything from gambling to construction in Lower Manhattan, a man who had been investigated by the FBI multiple times but never charged, a man whose name made prosecutors nervous and whose reputation kept his enemies cautious. Naomi had closed her laptop with shaking hands. She'd been saved by a mafia boss. Her landlord was a mafia boss, and he'd told her she was safe, that she belonged to him, that she was under his protection. She didn't know whether to be terrified or grateful. Maybe both. The next morning, Naomi had sent Maya to school like normal, had gone to work at the coffee shop like normal, and had tried to convince herself that yesterday had been some kind of bizarre nightmare. But the bruises on her throat were real, hidden under a scarf she normally wouldn't wear in November. And the business card was real, sitting in her wallet, burning a hole through the leather. She'd made it until her lunch break before she'd pulled out her phone and dialed the number. It had rung twice before a smooth, professional voice had answered. Dante Romano's office. Hi. This is Naomi Carter. Mr. Romano asked me to call." There had been a pause. Then the voice had said, "One moment, please, Miss Carter." The hold music had been classical, expensive sounding. Naomi had been prepared to wait, but within 30 seconds the line had clicked and Dante's voice had come through, warm and somehow intimate despite the phone between them. "Naomi, I'm glad you called. How are you feeling today?" "I'm fine," she'd said automatically, then had corrected herself. "Actually, I'm confused and scared." And I need to understand what happened yesterday. That's fair. Can you meet me for coffee? There's a place 2 blocks from your building. Bella Luna. Do you know it? Naomi had known it. Nice place. Too expensive for her usual budget. When? I'm free now if you are. Or tonight after you get off work. Whatever works better for you. Naomi had glanced at the clock. She had 40 minutes left on her lunch break. Now is fine. I can be there in 10 minutes. Perfect. I'll see you soon, Naomi. He'd hung up before she could change her mind, and Naomi had grabbed her coat and headed out into the cold November air, her heart hammering with nerves. She'd found Bella Luna easily, a small cafe with warm lighting and the smell of fresh bread and espresso. Dante had been waiting at a corner table, looking completely out of place in the cozy space, like a wolf, sitting down to tea. He'd stood when she'd entered, that old-fashioned courtesy that seemed at odds with everything she'd read about him online. Naomi, thank you for coming. Sit, please. What would you like? Coffee? Tea? Something to eat? Just coffee, Naomi had said, sitting across from him carefully, her body language defensive. Black. Dante had gestured to a server, ordered for both of them, then had turned his full attention to Naomi. I imagine you have questions. I Googled you, Naomi had said bluntly. I know who you are, what you are. I assumed you would. You're smart and careful. Both good qualities. Dante had leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. So you know that I'm not a legitimate businessman. You know what I do, broadly speaking, even if you don't know the details. And you're wondering what I want from you. Yes. Nothing, Dante had said simply. I want nothing from you, Naomi. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. Victor Marino was a problem I should have dealt with the day I bought that building, but I was handling other matters and I delegated. That was my mistake. And you almost paid for it. The coffee had arrived, giving Naomi a moment to process. You said I belong to you. I said he put his hands on something that belongs to me, meaning you're a tenant in my building, under my protection by default. I don't allow people to hurt what's mine. It's bad for business, and worse for my reputation. So this is about business? Dante's eyes had flickered with something Naomi couldn't quite read. It started that way, but when I saw his hand around your throat, when I saw the fear in your eyes, it became personal very quickly. I don't tolerate men who abuse women. It's a hard line for me. Always has been. Naomi had taken a sip of her coffee, using the moment to study him. In daylight, he was even more striking. The gray in his hair wasn't a sign of age but distinguished sophistication. The lines around his eyes suggested someone who smiled occasionally, though his mouth was currently set in serious lines. His hands were clean, manicured, but she could see old scars on his knuckles. A man who'd fought with his fists once, even if he probably had people to do that for him now. I can't accept free rent, Naomi had said finally. I don't want to owe you anything. You don't owe me anything. Consider it compensation for mental distress caused by my former employee. That sounds like something a lawyer would say. Dante had smiled then, just slightly. I have good lawyers. But Naomi, truly, this isn't about putting you in my debt. You're a single mother working 2 jobs, trying to raise your daughter and pursue your art. I respect that. I'm not interested in making your life harder. How do you know about my art? I own the building. I looked at the tenant files. You listed artist as your primary occupation on your original lease application 3 years ago. Naomi had felt exposed, like he'd been looking through her private life. So what happens now? You expect me to just pretend yesterday didn't happen? That I don't know what you are? I expect you to do whatever makes you feel safe, Dante had said. If that means moving out, I'll help you find a new place. If that means staying and avoiding me, I'll respect that. If that means having more conversations like this one, getting to know each other, seeing if we can move past the circumstances of how we met, I'd like that. Why would you want to get to know me? Dante had been quiet for a moment, his dark eyes studying her face. Because when I saw you in that hallway, terrified and fighting, something clicked. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since, and I'd like the chance to see if that feeling is mutual, or if it's just me. Naomi's breath had caught. She'd recognized the feeling he was describing because she'd felt it too. That electric moment when their hands had touched, the way her body had responded to his presence even through her fear. But this was insane. He was a criminal. She was a single mother. They existed in completely different worlds. This can't happen, Naomi had said, but her voice had lacked conviction. Why not? Because you're you, and I'm me. Because I have a daughter to think about. Because getting involved with someone in your line of work is probably the worst decision I could possibly make. All valid points, Dante had acknowledged. But consider this. You were already in danger living in my building without my protection. Victor wasn't the only predator in that neighborhood. At least now you have someone watching out for you in Maya. Someone who can actually do something if problems arise. That sounds like a threat. It's a reality check. The world is dangerous, especially for women on their own. I'm offering you safety. And maybe, if you're open to it, something more. Naomi had stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. I need to think about this. Thank you for the coffee. Dante had stood as well, respectful but not chasing. Take all the time you need. My offer stands. Whether you want my protection, my company, or both, you have my number. Naomi had left Bella Luna with her head spinning and her heart racing. The smart thing would be to stay as far away from Dante Romano as possible. The smart thing would be to find a new apartment, move Maya to a different school, start over somewhere he couldn't find her. But the smart thing didn't account for the way her body had responded to him, didn't account for the safety she'd felt when he dealt with Victor, didn't account for the strange connection she couldn't explain or ignore. Over the next week, Naomi had tried to go back to normal. She'd gone to work, picked Maya up from school, painted in the evenings, and pretended she wasn't constantly thinking about Dante Romano. But normal had been disrupted. A new property manager, a pleasant woman named Sophia in her 50s, had stopped by to introduce herself and give Naomi new keys. The building had suddenly acquired security cameras in the hallways and a doorman in the lobby, changes that probably cost more than the building would generate in rent for years. And flowers had started arriving. Every other day, a delivery person would show up at Naomi's door with beautiful arrangements. White roses, lilies, orchids, always expensive, and always with the same simple card. Thinking of you, D. Naomi had wanted to refuse them, to send them back. But Maya had fallen in love with them immediately, and Naomi hadn't had the heart to disappoint her daughter. Mommy, who's sending you flowers? Maya had asked after the third delivery. Do you have a boyfriend? No, baby. Just a friend. Must be a good friend. These are really pretty. They were pretty. And expensive. And a constant reminder that Dante Romano was thinking about her, that he was patient, that he was waiting for her to decide what she wanted. On the 8th day after their coffee shop meeting, Naomi had walked outside her building to find a man with a camera pointed at her door. He'd been standing across the street, partially hidden by a parked car, but Naomi had noticed him immediately. Her stomach had dropped. A reporter? Someone investigating Dante? Someone Victor had sent? She'd pulled out her phone, had called the number she'd been trying not to call, and Dante had answered on the first ring. Naomi, what's wrong? There's someone watching my building. A man with a camera. I don't know who he is or what he wants. Where are you right now? Still inside. I was about to go to work, but I saw him through the window. Stay inside. Lock your door. I'll handle it. Dante had hung up before Naomi could respond, and she'd locked the door, her heart racing. 10 minutes later, her phone had rung again. The photographer is gone. He was a private investigator hired by Victor. Marino. Apparently trying to find evidence that I was involved with you inappropriately. Possibly planning to use it as leverage. He won't be back. How do you know? Because I explained to him very clearly what would happen to his camera, his career, and his kneecaps if he came near you or your daughter again. And I had a similar conversation with Victor, who apparently didn't understand the first warning. He understands now. He's leaving the state. Naomi had felt relief and fear in equal measure. You can't just threaten people every time there's a problem. I can and I will when it comes to your safety. Get used to it, Naomi. There had been something possessive in his tone that should have bothered her, but instead had sent heat pooling in her stomach. I didn't ask for this. You didn't ask to be assaulted in your hallway either. But here we are. I'm not going to apologize for protecting you. Dante, go to work. You're safe. I'll call you later. He'd hung up. Again, leaving Naomi staring at her phone, torn between irritation and attraction, between fear and fascination. This was getting out of hand. She needed to establish boundaries, needed to make it clear that she wasn't his to protect, wasn't his to claim. But even as she thought it, she knew she was lying to herself. Because part of her, the part she didn't want to acknowledge, liked having someone care, liked having someone powerful enough to actually keep her safe, liked Dante Romano far more than was wise or reasonable. That evening, after Maya was asleep, Naomi had painted. She'd lost herself in color and movement, in the abstract shapes that helped her process emotions she couldn't articulate. She'd been working for 2 hours when her phone had buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Dante. Sorry to interrupt, but I couldn't stop thinking about you. How are you?" Naomi had stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "I'm painting. How did you get my number? I own the building. Your lease has your contact information. I hope you don't mind." She should mind. She absolutely should mind. "What do you want, Dante?" "To talk to you. To hear your voice. To know if you're thinking about me the way I'm thinking about you." Naomi's fingers had hovered over the keyboard. This was the moment to shut it down, to establish distance, to protect herself and Maya from whatever complicated, dangerous thing this was becoming. Instead, she'd typed, "What are you thinking about?" The response had come quickly. "How you looked in that hallway. Terrified, but still fighting. How you looked in the coffee shop. Brave enough to confront me about who I am. How you look in my mind every time I close my eyes, which has been frequently since I met you. This is a bad idea. Probably. But I've built an empire on bad ideas. Sometimes they turn out to be the best decisions you ever make." Naomi had smiled despite herself. "You're very confident. I'm persistent. There's a difference. I know what I want, and I'm not afraid to wait for it, to work for it, to prove I'm worth the risk." "And what do you want?" "You. Dinner with you. Conversation with you. Time to show you that I'm more than the reputation you Googled. A chance to know the woman behind the brave face and the beautiful paintings. You haven't seen my paintings. I will. When you're ready to show me. No pressure. Just possibility." Naomi had set down her phone and stared at her canvas, at the bold strokes of red and gold that somehow captured everything she was feeling. Fear and desire tangled together, danger and safety overlapping. The smart choice and the choice her heart wanted diverging sharply. She'd picked up her phone again. "One dinner, public place. I pay for myself. And if I decide this isn't what I want, you respect that. Deal. When?" "Friday night, 7 o'clock. You pick the place, but I reserve the right to leave if I'm uncomfortable." "Fair enough. I'll send you the details tomorrow. Thank you for giving me a chance, Naomi. Don't make me regret it. That's the last thing I want. Sleep well." Naomi hadn't slept well. She'd laid awake thinking about what she'd just agreed to, about the insanity of going on a date with a Mafia boss, about what her mother would say if she knew, about what kind of example this set for Maya. But she'd also thought about the way Dante had looked at her, like she was something precious, the way he'd defended her without hesitation, the way his presence made her feel protected in a way she hadn't felt since before Maya's father had left. Friday arrived too quickly, and not quickly enough. Naomi had arranged for Maya to have a sleepover at her friend's house, had changed outfits 3 times before settling on a simple black dress that made her feel confident, had told herself repeatedly that this was just dinner, that she could walk away anytime she wanted. The restaurant Dante had chosen was called Luca's, a small Italian place in Little Italy that Naomi had passed 100 times but never been able to afford. She'd arrived exactly at 7, had taken a deep breath, and had walked inside. Dante had been waiting at a table in the back, standing when he saw her, his eyes warming with appreciation. "You look beautiful," he'd said simply, pulling out her chair. "Thank you. You look nice too." He did. Dark gray suit, white shirt open at the collar, no tie. Sophisticated and dangerous in equal measure. They'd ordered wine, had studied menus in companionable silence, and then Dante had leaned forward slightly. "Thank you for being here. I know this isn't easy for you. It's terrifying, actually. I keep thinking about all the reasons this is a terrible idea." "What are the reasons?" Naomi had laughed, a slightly bitter sound. "Where do I start? You're a criminal. I'm a single mother. We exist in completely different worlds. Getting involved with you could put Maya in danger. Your life is violent and complicated, and mine is messy enough without adding that complexity. I barely know you, and the way I'm attracted to you doesn't make sense given everything I do know." Dante had listened without interruption, his expression serious. "Those are all valid concerns. I won't dismiss them or pretend they're not real. Yes, my work is dangerous. Yes, my life involves violence sometimes. And yes, getting close to me comes with risks. But let me address each point." He'd ticked items off on his fingers as he spoke. 1. I'm careful. My business stays separate from my personal life as much as possible. 2. Maya's safety is already something I take seriously. Whether you and I pursue this or not, I've made sure your daughter is protected. I have people watching your building, her school, everywhere she goes regularly. She's safer now than she was before I bought your building. 3. Different worlds can overlap. I'm not asking you to enter a world. I'm offering to step more fully into yours. 4. You're right that we barely know each other. That's why we're here. To change that. To see if the attraction we both feel is based on something real and lasting. The food had arrived, giving Naomi time to absorb his words. They'd eaten in silence for a moment before she'd asked, "Why me? You could have anyone. Why pursue someone who comes with so many complications?" Because complications aren't a negative for me. They're reality. Everyone has complications, Naomi. You're honest about yours. You're brave and strong, and you survived being a single mother for 5 years, which takes more courage than anything I've ever done. You're talented. You're beautiful. And when I look at you, I see someone worth knowing, worth protecting, worth building something with. Building what exactly? Whatever you want. Friendship, if that's all you can handle. More, if you're willing to risk it. I'm not trying to rush you or push you into something you're not ready for. I just want the chance to show you that I'm not just the things you read about online. They'd talked for hours. About art and business. About Maya and Dante's childhood in Brooklyn. About dreams and failures and the ways they'd both survived difficult circumstances. Naomi had learned that Dante's father had been violent, that his mother had died when he was 12, that he'd inherited the family business at 23 and had spent 20 years building it into something more strategic and less brutal than what he'd inherited. He'd asked about her paintings, had listened with genuine interest when she'd described her process, had asked intelligent questions that showed he was actually paying attention. By the time they'd finished dessert, Naomi had realized that she liked him. Not just the attraction, though that was definitely there, simmering under every word and glance, but she genuinely liked talking to him. He was smart and funny in a dry way, thoughtful and surprisingly gentle when the conversation turned to Maya. He'd asked about her daughter with real curiosity, had seemed charmed when Naomi had shown him photos on her phone, had promised he'd love to meet her someday if Naomi was comfortable with that. "I should go," Naomi had said finally, checking the time. "I need to pick Maya up early tomorrow." Dante had signaled for the check, had paid despite Naomi's protest that she'd wanted to split it. "Next time you can pay. But tonight, let me take care of it." "You're assuming there'll be a next time." "I'm hoping." Was I wrong to hope? Naomi had looked at him across the table, at this dangerous, complicated man who'd made her laugh and think and feel things she'd thought were dead. "No, you weren't wrong. I'd like to do this again." The smile that had crossed Dante's face had been worth every risk. "Good. I'll call you tomorrow." He'd walked her to her building, had waited until she was safely inside, and had driven, away without trying to kiss her or push for more. That restraint had meant more to Naomi than any grand gesture could have. He was giving her space, respecting her pace, treating her like someone whose boundaries mattered. Over the next 6 weeks, they'd seen each other 3 times a week. Dinners, walks through the city. One memorable afternoon at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where Dante had followed Naomi through galleries and had asked questions about technique and composition like he genuinely cared about the answers. He'd met Maya briefly, just a casual introduction when he'd stopped by to drop off a book he'd thought Naomi would like. Maya had been shy but curious, and Dante had been perfect with her, crouching down to her level, asking about her favorite subject at school, treating her with a respect that most adults didn't bother with for children. Naomi had felt herself falling despite every logical reason not to. Dante was patient and thoughtful, remembering small details she'd mentioned in passing, surprising her with gifts that showed he paid attention. Not expensive jewelry or flashy gestures, but meaningful things. A rare book about a painter she'd admired, art supplies from a boutique store she'd pointed out once, tickets to a gallery opening for a friend's show. He'd also been honest about his world in ways that most men in his position wouldn't have been. When she'd asked about his work, he hadn't sugarcoated it. "I run gambling operations, construction unions, protection services for businesses that prefer to avoid police involvement. It's not all violence and intimidation. Most of it is boring paperwork and negotiations. But yes, sometimes things get ugly. Sometimes I have to make decisions I'm not proud of. I won't lie to you about that. Have you ever killed anyone?" Naomi had asked one night, lying in his arms on the couch in her apartment after Maya had gone to bed. Dante had been quiet for a long moment. "Yes. Not recently. and never without cause. But yes, does that change how you see me? I don't know. I think it should, but somehow it doesn't. Does that make me terrible? It makes you realistic. The world isn't black and white, Naomi. Sometimes survival requires getting your hands dirty. They'd kissed for the first time that night. A slow, deep kiss that had made Naomi's toes curl and her heart race. Dante had held her face between his hands like she was precious, had pulled back to look into her eyes before kissing her again, and Naomi had felt wanted in a way she'd forgotten was possible. I'm falling for you, she'd whispered against his mouth. That terrifies me. I fell the moment I saw you in that hallway, Dante had murmured back. So you're in good company. Their physical relationship had progressed slowly. Dante, always letting Naomi set the pace, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. But 1 month after their first date, she'd finally invited him to stay the night. Maya had been at another sleepover, and Naomi had cooked dinner, had opened wine, and had told Dante with her eyes and her hands that she was ready for more. He'd made love to her like she was the only thing that mattered in the world, slow and thorough and attentive to every response. He'd whispered Italian words she didn't understand, but that sounded beautiful. Had told her she was gorgeous. Perfect. His. And Naomi had given herself over to the feeling, to the pleasure and the connection and the rightness of being with him. Afterwards, wrapped in his arms in her small bed, Naomi had felt more content than she had in years. I love you, she'd said, the words surprising her as they came out. I think I've loved you for weeks, but I was too scared to say it. Dante had tightened his arms around her, had kissed her forehead. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone. You and Maya, you're my world now. Everything I do, every decision I make, I think about how it affects you, how it protects you. You've changed everything for me, Naomi. I don't want to change you. I want you to be yourself. You've made me want to be better. That's different from changing me. You've given me a reason to build something that lasts. Something more than the legacy of violence I inherited. They'd fallen asleep tangled together, and Naomi had slept more peacefully than she could remember, safe and warm and loved. But reality had a way of intruding on happiness. 3 weeks later, Naomi had been walking home from the grocery store when a car had pulled up beside her. A man she didn't recognize had leaned out the window. Naomi Carter? Who's asking? Get in the car. Someone wants to talk to you. Naomi had felt fear spike through her chest. No. Leave me alone. The man had opened the car door, had started to get out, and Naomi had dropped her grocery bags and had run. She'd made it half a block before he'd caught up to her, his hand closing around her arm. Don't make this difficult. My boss just wants a conversation. Let go of me. Naomi had yanked her arm free, had pulled out her phone. I'm calling the police. Your boyfriend isn't the only one with power in this city. The police won't help you. Now get in the car, or I'll put you in the car. Your choice. Naomi had made the choice to scream, loud and piercing. People had started looking, pulling out phones, and the man had cursed. You just made things complicated. He'd let her go and had gotten back in the car, speeding away before anyone could get a plate number. Naomi had stood there shaking, her heart hammering, her grocery bags scattered on the sidewalk. She'd called Dante with trembling fingers. Someone just tried to grab me. A man in a black car. He said his boss wanted to talk to me. Dante's response had been immediate and cold. Where are you? 3rd and Mulberry. Stay there. Don't move. I'm 3 minutes away. He'd actually been 2 minutes. His car, pulling up with a screech of tires. Dante had gotten out, had looked at Naomi's face, and had pulled her into his arms. Are you hurt? No. Scared. He said you weren't the only one with power. Who would want to talk to me? Dante's jaw had tightened. Marco Vitelli. He runs the Vitelli family, competitors of mine. He's been trying to expand into my territory for months. I've been blocking him. This is pressure. He's going after you to get to me. What do we do? You and Maya are moving into my place tonight. Not up for discussion. I can't protect you if you're somewhere I can't control every access point. Dante. Naomi. He'd cupped her face, his eyes fierce. I will not lose you. I will not let anyone touch you or Maya, but I need you to trust me and do what I ask. Can you do that? Naomi had nodded, too shaken to argue. Within 2 hours, she and Maya had been moved to Dante's penthouse in Tribeca, a stunning space with views of the river and security that rivaled the White House. Maya had been delighted by the space, by the big bedroom Dante had set up for her with new toys and books. Naomi had been terrified by the implications. How long do we stay here? Until I handle this situation with Marco. How do you handle it? Dante had looked at her seriously. You don't want to know the details. Just trust that I'll keep you safe. 3 days later, news had broken that Marco Vitelli had been arrested on federal racketeering charges. The FBI had apparently been building a case for months, and they'd finally moved. Dante had been suspiciously uninvolved, at least according to the media, though Naomi suspected he'd had something to do with the timing. Is it over? She'd asked him that night. Marco's organization will fall apart without him. His lieutenants will fight each other for control, which means they won't have time or resources to come after us. We're safe. You're safe. You arranged his arrest somehow. I provided information too. People who could use it. That's all. Naomi had looked at him. At this man who'd reordered his world to protect her. I should be horrified. I should be disgusted that you manipulated law enforcement like that. But you're not. No. I'm relieved. And grateful. And more in love with you than I thought possible. Dante had kissed her then, deep and claiming. Move in with me. Officially. Not because of danger, but because I want you here. I want Maya here. I want to build a life with you. That's moving fast. We've been dating for 4 months. I'm 40 years old. When you know, you know. And I know. Naomi had thought about her small apartment, about the life she'd built for herself and Maya that had always felt temporary and precarious. Then she'd thought about this penthouse, about the security and stability Dante offered, about the way Maya laughed when he was around. Okay. Yes. We'll move in. But I'm keeping my studio space. I need somewhere that's just mine to paint. Done. I'll set up a studio in the 2nd bedroom. Or buy you a space nearby if you prefer. Whatever you need. They'd moved in officially a week later. Maya had adjusted quickly, loving her new school that Dante had enrolled her in, loving the big bedroom and the doorman who always had candy for her. Naomi had adjusted more slowly, feeling like she'd stepped into someone else's life, someone more fortunate and secure than she'd ever been. But she'd also been happy. Dante was attentive and loving, making time for family dinners despite his busy schedule, attending Maya's school events, treating Naomi like she was the most important person in his world. 6 months after they'd moved in, Dante had proposed, not with a big public gesture, but privately, just the two of them on the terrace overlooking the river at sunset. Marry me, he'd said simply. Make this official. Let me give you my name and my protection and everything I have. I don't need your money. I know. But I need you marry me, Naomi. She'd said yes because by then she couldn't imagine saying anything else. They'd gotten married 3 months later in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Maya had been the flower girl, had insisted on wearing a huge pink dress, and had taken her role very seriously. Naomi's mother had flown in from Georgia, had taken one look at Dante, and had pulled Naomi aside. That man is dangerous. I know, Mama, but he loves you. I can see it. He looks at you like you hung the moon. He does. Her mother had hugged her tight. Then I'm happy for you, baby. Just be careful. I will. And for a year, life had been good. Better than good. Maya had thrived. Naomi's art had taken off, her work selling in galleries around the city. Dante had been supportive and proud, had attended every opening, had bought half the paintings in her first solo show just because he could. They'd been happy, settled, building something that felt permanent. But happiness, in Dante's world, was always fragile. One night, 8 months into their marriage, Naomi had been at home with Maya when men had broken into the penthouse. They'd gotten past the security somehow, had appeared in the living room while Maya was doing homework and Naomi was cooking dinner. 3 men with guns, one of them grabbing Maya, another grabbing Naomi. Your husband needs to learn his place, the lead man had said. Marco Vitelli sends his regards from prison. Consider this a message. Naomi had fought, had screamed, had done everything she could to get to her daughter. Maya had been crying, terrified, struggling in the man's grip. And Naomi had felt helpless, in a way that was worse than any nightmare. Take me. Let her go. She's just a child. Take me and leave her. That's not how this works. But then suddenly Dante had been there, appearing through the penthouse door with 6 armed men behind him. The transformation in his demeanor had been terrifying. Gone was the gentle man who'd held Naomi at night, replaced by something cold and lethal. Put them down. Now. Or what? You're outnumbered, Romano. Look behind you. The intruders had turned to find more men coming from the other direction, fully armed, faces hard. Dante's voice had been ice. You broke into my home. threatened my wife and daughter. There is no negotiation here. There is no mercy. Put them down or die where you stand." The standoff had lasted maybe 10 seconds before the intruders had realized they'd lost. They'd released. Naomi and Maya had put their hands up. Dante had gestured to his men. "Take them. I'll deal with them later." His men had hauled the intruders away, and Dante had immediately crossed to Naomi and Maya, dropping to his knees in front of his daughter. "Are you okay, sweetheart? Did they hurt you?" Maya had thrown her arms around Dante's neck, sobbing. "I was so scared. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." He'd held Maya until she stopped crying, then had checked Naomi over carefully. "You're not hurt?" "No. Shaken but not hurt." "How did they get in?" "Someone on my security team betrayed me. I'll find out who. This won't happen again." That night, after Maya was finally asleep in Naomi's arms, Dante had sat on the edge of the bed. "I need you to know something. What I did tonight, what I'm going to do to those men, there are consequences for that in my world." "I don't want to know," Naomi had said quietly. "Just make sure they can't come back." "They can't. They won't. No one will threaten you or Maya again. I promise you that." Dante had been true to his word. Security had been tripled. Naomi and Maya had been assigned personal bodyguards who were discreet but ever present. The penthouse had been reinforced like a fortress, and the men who'd broken in had disappeared, their fate unknown and unspoken. For a while, Naomi had struggled with the reality of Dante's world, struggled with the violence she knew existed on the periphery of their life. But she'd also understood that this was the price of safety, the cost of being with a man like Dante. And when she looked at Maya, safe and thriving and loved, when she looked at her own work flourishing and her life more stable than it had ever been, she'd made her peace with it. Now, 2 years after that first night in the hallway, Naomi stood in her studio working on a new piece. Maya was at a friend's house. Dante was due home soon from a business meeting, and Naomi was painting the happiest she'd ever been, creating art that reflected joy and love and the strange, beautiful life they'd built together. She heard the door open, heard Dante's footsteps. He appeared in the studio doorway, still in his suit, looking tired but pleased. "How was your day?" "Good. Productive." "How was your meeting?" "Long. Boring. The only interesting thing was thinking about coming home to you." He crossed to her, kissed her softly. "I love watching you paint. You get this expression, totally focused, like nothing else exists. That's how I feel when I'm working. Time disappears." Dante wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I have something to tell you. The Vitelli family is officially dissolved. Marco's remaining lieutenants took plea deals. It's over. The threat to our family is gone." Naomi turned in his arms. "Really? It's really over? Really? We can breathe. We can relax. We can just be a family without looking over our shoulders." Naomi kissed him, deep and grateful. "Thank you. For everything. For protecting us. For loving us. For being the man you are. Thank you for taking a chance on a dangerous man in a hallway. For seeing past the reputation. For building this life with me." He touched her face gently. "I love you, Naomi Romano. I love you too." That evening, with Maya home and the Prace, 3 of them having dinner together, laughing over Maya's stories from school, Naomi realized that sometimes the worst moment of your life really did become the first moment of something beautiful. She'd been terrified in that hallway, certain she was alone and vulnerable. But she'd been wrong. She'd been seen by someone who'd made her safety his priority, who'd seen her value when she'd almost forgotten it herself. Dante Romano had saved her that night. But over time, she'd saved him too. From loneliness, from the isolation of his position, from a life that was all power and no warmth. They'd saved each other, and now they had something neither had dared to hope for. A family, a home, a love that was worth every risk they'd taken. As Naomi tucked Maya into bed that night, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Mommy, are you happy?" "Very happy, baby." "Why do you ask?" "Because you smile more now. You laugh more. I like it when you're happy." Naomi kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm happy because I have you. And because Dante loves us. We're lucky, aren't we?" "Super lucky. I love Dante too. He's the best." "He is." Later, lying in bed next to Dante, Naomi thought about how her life had changed. From struggling and alone to safe and loved. From barely surviving to actually thriving. From running from danger to running toward the dangerous man who'd become her home. What are you thinking about? Dante asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. That night in the hallway. How scared I was. How you appeared like some avenging angel. Avenging angel? Dante laughed softly. That's generous. Most people would say, avenging devil. Maybe. But you saved me. And you've kept saving me every day since. That makes you my angel. You saved yourself, Naomi. You ran from an abusive situation. You built a life for your daughter. You survived. I just provided backup. Important backup. Maybe. But you're stronger than you. Think. You always have been. Naomi turned to face him, studying his face in the dim light. This dangerous, complicated, loving man who'd chosen her. I'm glad I called you that day. I'm glad I said yes to dinner. I'm glad I took the risk. Best decision you ever made? Definitely top 3. Only top 3? Dante's eyes gleamed with amusement. What are the other 2? Having Maya. And marrying you. In that order. I'll accept second place to your daughter. That's fair. They'd made love then. Slow and sweet, reaffirming everything they'd built together. And as Naomi fell asleep in Dante's arms, safe and loved and home, she thought about the words he'd snarled that first night. You touched the wrong woman. At the time, she'd been terrified. Now she understood. She'd been the wrong woman to threaten because Dante Romano had decided she was his to protect. And once Dante decided something, it became reality. She was his woman, his wife, his love, and he was hers. Her protector, her partner, her home. Sometimes the best love stories started in the worst circumstances. Sometimes being saved led to saving someone in return. And sometimes the person you were running from led you straight to the person you were supposed to find. Naomi had found her person in the most unexpected way, and she'd never looked back.